Ruth Callan leaned into it, one arm pulling the rope of a half-broken sled. The other held the blanket that covered her brother's face. Beneath the wool, she could feel his faint breathing, uneven, shallow. No road remained, only ridges of white and the echo of the church bell she'd left behind. That bell had tolled for mercy the night she begged at the chapel door. Pastor Givens hadn't answered. He'd looked through the crack, eyes steady, voice flat. "You brought this on yourself." Then the door closed, and the storm took the rest of his words. Now her boots sank ankle-deep, froze, lifted, sank again. Each step was a fight against the cold that wanted everything. When she stopped to catch breath, the sled ropes cut her palms through the worn gloves. The sound that escaped her wasn't a cry, just the breath of someone who'd run out of prayers. Her brother Samuel stirred once. "Ruth?" The voice was so thin she almost thought it was the wind. She crouched, pressed her forehead to his. "Almost there," she said, though there was nowhere left to go. A cluster of pines marked the valley's bend. Beyond it, the horizon blurred into a wall of white. No smoke, no trail, no sign of anyone. She kept walking. The hem of her dress had turned to ice. Every fold clung heavy against her legs. A crow passed overhead, one black stroke in the blank sky, then vanished. Hours or minutes passed, the kind that steal count. The rope slipped from her grip once. She nearly didn't pick it back up. Her lips cracked when she whispered, "Please." It wasn't a prayer this time, just a word to keep her moving. Somewhere ahead, through the roar of the storm, a dull rhythm broke the pattern of wind. Thunk, pause, thunk. It came again, faint, human. An axe, maybe, or her mind trying to comfort itself. She turned toward the sound, trudging downhill until the snow softened underfoot. Then she saw it, a dim orange pulse through the trees. Not sunlight, too low, too alive. Firelight, a cabin's glow half buried behind a drift. She fell to her knees, dragging the sled beside her, eyes stinging from wind and disbelief. The door was closed but unlatched. She pushed it once, nothing. Again, harder. It groaned open with a shove of her shoulder. Inside, warmth struck her like a blow. The air carried wood smoke and iron. A man turned from the stove, axe still in hand. Broad-shouldered, coat open, eyes startled but steady. Snow clung to his beard, melting slow. He stopped when he saw Samuel on the sled, limp beneath the blanket. His jaw tightened. "You alone out here?" Ruth tried to answer, but the words tangled. Only sound came out, hoarse and small. He crossed the room in 3 strides, set the axe aside, and lifted the boy in his arms as if he weighed nothing. "Set him by the stove," he said. His voice was low, rough with disbelief. She obeyed. Knees trembling, she knelt beside Samuel, rubbing his hands while the stranger fetched a kettle. The sound of boiling water filled the silence between them. "Name's Cale Mercer," he muttered after a while. "Cabin's mine, Ruth Callan," she whispered. He's my brother." Cale nodded once, eyes fixed on the fire. "Storm's getting worse. You'll both stay till it quits." Outside, the wind screamed against the logs. Inside, the kettle hissed. For the first time in days, Ruth stopped shaking, not from warmth, but from the shock of being saved by someone who hadn't asked who she was or why she'd been left behind. And in that silence, something faint but real began to thaw. The storm did not stop that night. It pressed against the cabin walls, searching for cracks. Inside, the air thickened with heat and silence. Ruth sat by the stove, her palms open to the fire. Steam curled from the kettle. Samuel slept near the hearth, face flushed, breath shallow but steady. Cale moved quietly, as if the floor itself might break under noise. He filled 2 tin cups with water, handed one to her. She nodded, afraid to speak, afraid that sound would undo the fragile peace between them. He looked older in the lamplight than she first thought, lines cut deep from years of cold mornings and harder choices. His eyes carried the kind of tired that doesn't fade with rest. "You came from Hollow Creek?" he asked at last. Ruth hesitated. "Was passing through," she said. "The pastor there, he said the rooms were full." He didn't answer, only poked the fire until sparks jumped, their brief light flickering across the rough timber walls. The sound of snow hitting the roof was constant, a drum of winter reminding them how small they were. Cale glanced toward Samuel. "He'll need broth when he wakes." "I can make it," she said. "You rest first." "I've rested enough." Their words carried no argument, only habit. Two people used to surviving on their own. He stepped aside, letting her take the ladle. She moved carefully, as though the cabin were borrowed time. The faint smell of herbs filled the space, mingling with the sharp scent of smoke. When she looked up again, he was fixing a broken shutter near the window, hammer strokes soft but precise. Every sound he made was deliberate, meant to hold back the world outside. Later, when Samuel stirred and coughed, Cale was already beside him with a wet cloth. Ruth froze, watching the man's hand steady against the boy's shoulder. No hesitation. No judgment. Just warmth. Easy there, he murmured, voice low enough not to wake the storm. You're safe now. Samuel blinked at him, half dreaming. Are you the doctor? No, Cale said, faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Just someone with a roof. Ruth turned away before he could see her eyes fill. She pretended to check the stew, though there was nothing left to stir. As the night stretched, she dozed against the chair's edge. Cale threw another log into the fire, careful not to wake her. Outside, the wind howled and broke. Inside, her breathing joined his in quiet rhythm. When dawn finally came, pale and thin through the frosted window, the storm had eased. Snow dripped from the eaves in soft, steady lines. Cale opened the door a crack. Cold air rolled in, sharp and clean. He stepped outside for wood. Ruth followed him with her eyes, broad back under the faded coat, boots sinking deep into the new snow. For a long moment she just listened to the rhythm of his axe beyond the wall, measured, patient, alive. When he came back, his hair was dusted white, his breath fogging the air. Road'll be gone till next week, he said, wiping his hands. That long? Long enough to rest, he replied. Ruth looked toward Samuel, who was stirring again, color returning to his cheeks. Then we'll stay till it clears, she said quietly. Cale nodded. That settled then. Neither smiled, but something in the room shifted, like the cabin itself had exhaled. The blizzard could take the world for all it cared. Inside these four walls, warmth had found a place to begin. By the third day, the world outside was all white and quiet. The storm had folded itself into silence, leaving the cabin half buried but still standing. Smoke from the chimney rose in a thin, straight line, the only moving thing for miles. Ruth hung Samuel's blanket near the stove to dry. He was awake now, sitting up, tracing shapes in the fogged window with a fingertip. His laughter came soft, almost startled, like he'd forgotten the sound of it. Cale split kindling by the door. Each swing of the axe cut through the hush like punctuation. He worked steady, never speaking unless needed. But every so often he'd glance toward the stove, toward them, and the hardness in his face would shift, just slightly. Ruth noticed. She pretended not to. She folded another blanket, smoothing the edges with careful hands. For days she told herself she would leave when the roads cleared. Yet every time the thought came, the air in her chest tightened. Your brother's stronger, Cale said finally, resting the axe against the wall. He's tougher than he looks. Got that from you. I reckon. The words landed quiet but solid. She didn't reply. The kettle began to hiss, giving her an excuse to turn away. When he stepped closer to pour coffee, their sleeves brushed. She froze, not out of fear, but because it had been so long since kindness had felt real. He noticed her pause, said nothing, only set the cup down within reach. Outside, the snow shone with a dull blue sheen. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a faint echo rolled through the valley. The creak of a wagon, or maybe just shifting ice. Cale turned toward the sound, frowning. Someone coming? Ruth asked. Could be, he murmured. Could be nothing, but the unease didn't leave his eyes. He moved to the window, scanning the white stretch below the hill. Nothing there. Still, he went to check the rifle leaning by the door, wiping frost from the barrel. Ruth felt the quiet thicken again. We're safe here, she said, though she didn't know why she believed it. He nodded once. For now. The rest of the morning passed in that delicate calm, the kind that feels borrowed. Ruth helped mend a torn shirt with a needle from her satchel, the same one she'd kept since the journey west. Cale repaired the roof beam near the hearth. They worked side by side, trading no more than a few words, but every sound, the thread pulling, the hammer tapping, spoke more than speech could. When Samuel dozed again, Ruth stepped outside. The cold bit her cheeks, but the air was pure. From the porch, she saw the valley stretching below, snow smoothing everything it touched. Cale joined her a moment later, standing a few feet away. "You still plan to move on when the road clears?" he asked. She looked down at her worn boots, at the trail they'd pressed into the snow. "That was before," she said. "Before what?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Before I saw a man stop for strangers in the storm." He didn't answer, but the faintest smile crossed his face before he turned back toward the horizon. "Sometimes stopping costs more than passing by. And sometimes it saves what's left," she replied. The wind rose briefly, brushing their coats together, then fell away again. Neither spoke after that. The snow around them gleamed, untouched, the world holding its breath. From inside, Samuel's voice broke the stillness. "Ruth, someone's coming up the hill." They both turned. Far below, two dark figures on horseback moved through the white, too slow to be travelers, too steady to be lost. Cale's jaw tightened. "Stay inside," he said. The warmth they'd built wavered, replaced by the cold weight of whatever waited beyond the ridge. By noon, the riders had reached the cabin. Snow clung to their coats in rough patches, the horses breathing steam. Cale stood in the doorway before they could knock. His hand rested near the rifle, not on it, just close enough to be seen. The taller one lifted his chin. "Pastor Givens sent us," he said. "Said there's a woman here owes explanation." Ruth heard the words through the thin walls. Her hands went still over the basin where she'd been washing cloths. The water had cooled to gray. She wiped them dry on her skirt and stood motionless. Cale's voice stayed level. "She's not your concern." The men exchanged glances, one snorting. "Not ours, maybe, but the town's. Folks don't take kindly to runaways living under a man's roof. It's the Lord's house they remember her from. Door closed, sin waiting outside." Cale didn't move. "Storm's over," the man added. "She can come back and set things right." Ruth stepped into view then, pale but steady. Her brother clung to her skirt, eyes wide. The air between her and the riders stretched thin as glass. "I'll go," she said softly. Cale turned, disbelief flashing across his face. "No need," she shook her head once. "There's always need." He wanted to stop her. Instead, he stepped aside. Sometimes silence was the only mercy left. The road back to Hollow Creek was harder now that the snow had settled, every hoofbeat muffled. Ruth rode behind the two men on a borrowed mare. The sun was out but cold, its light sharp and without warmth. Samuel stayed behind with Cale, her last request before leaving. When they reached town, the street was lined with slush and strangers. Doors half open, curtains moving. Faces she remembered from those first days, the ones who wouldn't meet her eyes then, now staring openly. Pastor Givens waited outside the chapel, coat buttoned to his throat, Bible tucked under his arm. His smile was small, rehearsed. "Sister Callan," he greeted, voice smooth as the ice underfoot. "I trust the storm gave you time for reflection." She didn't answer. He motioned toward the steps. "Come inside so all may see repentance." Ruth stopped short of the threshold. The same door that had closed against her now stood open, heat spilling out. But it wasn't mercy she felt. It was a stage. "Your word," Givens continued, "will clear this matter. Tell them the rancher took you in without impropriety. Tell them you seek forgiveness." The crowd waited, breath held. Ruth's eyes searched the faces, women who'd turned away, men who'd crossed the street. Each one wore the same look, half hunger, half relief that she was the one standing there, not them. She spoke quietly. "He saved my brother's life, and yours perhaps," the pastor said with a thin smile. "But gratitude need not shame the Lord." Ruth looked past him, to the pew where she once knelt alone. "The Lord," she said, "wasn't the one who shut that door." A ripple moved through the crowd. Givens stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Careful now." Ruth turned, walking down the steps before he could stop her. No one reached out. Snowflakes had begun to fall again, fine, slow, almost kind. When she returned to the ridge that night, the cabin's windows glowed faintly through the dark. She paused before the door, heart heavy with what she'd left behind and what might not forgive her return. Inside, Cale sat at the table, head bowed, hands still. The fire was low. He didn't rise when she entered, just looked at her once, the question in his eyes quiet and sharp. She closed the door softly. The storm had passed, but something colder now sat between them, made of shame, and all the words they hadn't said. Outside, the wind stirred loose snow into small ghosts that danced across the threshold. Morning crept in slow, pale as breath. The fire had burned down to coals, their glow trembling against the cabin walls. Ruth woke in the chair near the stove, a blanket half slipped from her shoulders. Samuel still slept on the cot, one hand clutching the wooden horse Cale had carved for him the night before. For a while, she didn't move. The quiet was so full it almost hummed, the kind that comes after long storms, when even regret sounds softer. Cale stood outside, splitting wood. She could see his shadow through the frost-hazed window, broad and steady, the motion of the axe clean and rhythmic. Every strike landed with a care that had nothing to do with anger. Ruth rose, folded the blanket, and opened the door. The cold met her gently now. The air smelled of pine and thaw. A thin stream of meltwater ran down from the eaves, each drop catching light before it fell. Cale paused mid-swing, resting the axe handle against his boot. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," she said. Her voice carried differently in the open air, lighter maybe. "Storm's finally giving up." He nodded, looking out toward the white hills. "Road'll be open in a few days." She followed his gaze. The thought of leaving should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like watching the trail vanish before she could choose it. "Samuel's better," he said quietly. "He'll run you ragged soon enough." Ruth smiled, small, real. "He's already planning where to build a fort." Cale grunted, half amusement, half memory. "Good place for one behind the barn." They stood like that for a while, side by side, not needing to fill the silence. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled only a little. "I went because I thought I owed them an answer. You don't owe them anything. Maybe not. But I had to see if the door would open." He met her eyes. "And it did, but not for the reason I hoped." The faintest wind moved through the trees, lifting her hair, carrying the smell of wood smoke and something new beneath, the first trace of earth. Cale set the axe aside. "You can stay," he said simply. "Till spring. Or longer." Ruth looked down at her hands, red from the cold, then at the cabin door standing open behind them. Inside, the firelight flickered across Samuel's face, soft and alive. "Wouldn't that trouble the town?" she asked. "They've got enough to trouble over." He hesitated, then added, "Besides, they weren't the ones who found you." The words settled between them, gentle and final. She blinked against the sting of them, not from hurt but from relief. Snow began to fall again, not the kind that buries, but the kind that glows as it lands. She reached out, caught a flake on her glove, watched it melt into a dark spot that disappeared. "I don't have much," she said, "but I can keep the stove warm, mend what needs mending." Cale's mouth curved into something like a smile. "Then we're even." From inside, Samuel called her name, laughter chasing his voice. She turned toward the sound. When she looked back, Cale was already stacking the new wood by the door, the rhythm of his work steady as a heartbeat. The world beyond the ridge was still winter, but here, just here, the ground had begun to give.